Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Our panel discussion today will be concerning the Rangeland Fire Protection Associations and how we can bolster wildland firefighting capacity by providing support to our local landowners. Also to protect their property and the property of their neighbors. These uniquely positioned nonprofit corporations have reduced response times for firefighting, increased the odds of keeping fires small, while Idaho, Oregon, and Nevada already have RFPAs. This panel will explore ways to expand the implementation of this effective model. We're going to explore how these organizations are relatively inexpensive means of identifying and responding to wildland fires in remote areas. In addition to protecting private property values and water quality, wildfire suppression can also promote conservation values by protecting critical habitat. The objective of the panel is to highlight successful RFPA work and explore barriers to establishing and maintaining these useful associations. On our panel today is myself, Knute Sandahl. I'm the Idaho State Fire Marshal. Gentlemen, if you would introduce yourself.
Yes, good morning. I'm Mike Guerry. I'm a third-generation rancher from the Castleford and Three Creek area, about 2 hours south of here. I actually run in the Jarvidge Resource Area and then on the Humboldt-Tioga National Forest in Nevada. So our operation spans both sides of the line. We run sheep and cattle. Again, as I say, I'm third generation. My grandfather came in 1910 as a herder from the old country in Spain and as a 17-year-old boy. And he ended up landing in Bliss, Idaho on March 17th, 1910. And so you can probably imagine what he thought, because the Bass Country looks a lot like the Palouse up in North Idaho. And there was probably a 30-mile-an-hour wind blowing and tumbleweeds rolling down the road. And he probably thought to himself, what have I done? But he stuck it out. And like I said, our operation's over 110 years old now. But We've worked with fire in our area all my life. Fire is a huge component in our ecosystem and an important component in our ecosystem. When I was a young man in the 60s, a big fire was 3,000 acres. And then it kept growing. But back in the 60s too, much like the Indians had done prior to us, we used prescribed fire and maybe unprescribed fire in instances, but and for purposes of this discussion, it was all on private land because I'm not sure if the statute of limitations is run on everything yet at this point. But we did. When I was a kid, I'd go with my granddad. I'd be issued a box of stick matches, and I was expected to have those gone by the time we got back. And we'd burn 100 acres over here, and we'd burn 600 over here, and we'd do it on a mosaic, manageable level. Along come the 80s and the 90s, big fires moved up to 30,000 acres. Then came the 2000s. And I remember in 2000 itself, we had a large fire, the largest fire we'd had down in O'Neill Basin, about 100,000 plus. And I remember my dad saying, and he's gone now, but I remember my dad saying to me back then, he says, you'll remember this fire the rest of your life. We just never had one like that. Well, the rest of my life apparently was a very short period of time, because we had another one and we had another one and we had another one, to the point where we ultimately had the Murphy Complex fire, which was almost 700,000 acres. And then ultimately the last one was the Kenyon Road fire before we finally, because we went through a series of time where we'd have a big fire, we'd get fired up, we'd get ramped up on both the federal and the private side. We're going to do this, we're going to do that. And then the next year we wouldn't have a big event, and it was like, well, that was a once in a lifetime deal. So we're not going to do those things. And a lifetime, again, like I said, was short, because in 2 years we had another one. And so it ultimately drove us to the thought of the Rangeland Fire Protection Associations and hopefully being able to be a multiplier effect with the agencies. And because of the hard work of those like Governor Otter and Burt Brackett, who was state senator at that time, we were able to get the legislation in place and form. And I know at that time, my grandfather was probably sitting up in the clouds saying, no, you no fighter marshal, you fighter maker, no fighter marshal. And but I think he understands today too, we had to get back to some fashion of creating a mosaic and a manageable type situation. And I believe that the partnership between the federal and private resources has done that.
Good morning, I'm Brent Meisinger. I'm from the Bureau of Land Management. I'm an FMO, Fire Management Officer in Wind River, Bighorn Basin in Wyoming. Before that position, I was for the state office of Oregon at the BLM. My job then was the RFPA coordinator liaison kind of position that they created to work with the rangeland groups and the RFDs, rural fire departments, to build those relationships and make sure that all's going good out on the landscape. So it was a job I took very serious because coming from a ranch family, you know, I understand where the ranchers are coming from, and so being able to take all that knowledge and the relationships built over years and years really helped BLM and the landowners. The thing you got to realize too about, you know, the RFPAs and the government is we all live in the same community. We all grew up together. We all know each other, go to churches together, sit next to each other at sporting events. So it's not like we don't know each other, but we do need to expand on our relationships to make sure we're working well together, training together, all that's going to make us do a good job out on the line and help out landowners and help out the BLM and other agencies that are involved. So, you know, been doing it for a long time and, you know, gonna continue doing it. And, you know, in Wyoming, you know, the different change that we're going to there is we don't have RFPAs, so we have rural fire departments, which is kind of going over the same concept as the RFPAs. It's just a little different concept, but same ideas. So, it's a good concept, and I think the future's going to be good with it. So, thank you.
Good morning. I'm Rick Finis, South Idaho Fire Program Liaison with the Idaho Department of Lands Fire Management Bureau. I've been with the state of Idaho for 20 years now. Started with IDL in 2008 at the Southwest Forest Protective District, where I spent many years working in Boise County. Speaking of rural fire departments, I think we had the highest concentration of non-taxing fire departments in the state in that county. And 2017 moved over to the position I'm in now, where I started working with the RFPAs. It's the main focus of my position. At the time we had, I believe, 8 established, and we've added 2 since then, Weezer River just this past year. It's been an interesting progression, starting to work with IDL and cooperating with the BLM and the Forest Service on the Southwest District, and seeing the interaction. I'm going to have to call out the BLM on this one, but and how they dealt with landowners and the attitude they had 10 years ago, or prior to 10 years ago, and then the RFPA showed up, and that has flipped 180 degrees. It's really gratifying to see that, and to be able to work with, we always talk about the ranchers, and I do have to plug the other folks that are involved with the RFPAs in Idaho. It did start with the ranchers, but we have some RFPAs that have farmers. We have some RFPAs that have summer home owners. The Henry's Creek RFPA chairman himself runs a small tech company out of Bowen, Idaho. And that's an interesting RFPA over there with the different topography, the farmers, ranchers, and landowners over there. So it's been really gratifying to work with these organizations. My job, I assist them in getting stood up as RFPAs. I help them get their PPE and their firefighting apparatus. I work with the BLM state office in Idaho on almost all decisions we make with the RFPAs. We're now starting to work with the Forest Service a little bit more with the formation of the Weezer River RFPA up out of Cambridge, and with the Payette Forest there, and the Sawtooth Forest has been involved with the Shoshone Basin, and they're reworking their agreements with them right now. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
And thank you, gentlemen. As I said before, my name is Knute Sandahl. I'm the Idaho State Fire Marshal. Most of my experience has been here in the built environment, if you will. The wildland issues that Idaho faces is a relatively new concept. I've been here for 16 years, and it's been quite the education. When the RFPA program was first introduced by Governor Otter, I looked at it as a very interesting concept, having essentially civilians conducting firefighting activities. And through the years, I've seen that program grow and have seen the benefits of that program in protecting the rangeland. So a question that I have for the panel is, the RFPA program has existed now for about 10 years. What are some of the notable changes or refinements that you've noticed over these years?
Well, the process has matured a lot in the last 10 years. I'll be the first to admit, and I'm also going to apologize if I actually made it work. Kind of dangerous or something like this. I might put somebody's eye out or something. But we work with started out working with our partners, as has been described here today, and trust. And I've heard that term used a lot during this. Tanya, you used it several times, and trust was an issue with us too, and Rick alluded to it as well. As in the beginning, I know there was feelings on the BLM side of, now we're going to have to take care of all these sheep herders and cowboys running loose out here, and there was, I would tell you, feelings on our side that maybe that the efforts weren't what they should have been by the BLM firefighters and whatnot in past times. I didn't personally have that feeling because I'd worked with them in a lot, but those that hadn't worked with them as much, there was a lot of that out there. But the thing was, we came at it professionally from both sides, and again, it comes down to people. And we had the right people in the right place at the right time, whether it was governors, whether it was legislators, and whether it was the people in the BLM or ourselves in the RFPAs. We had a common mission, we had a common goal, and we worked toward that very hard. And so we have matured, and we've both sides have become better. We've become better in the fact that we used to leave our deserts and all those hundreds of miles of water systems and tanks and open storage tanks and those kind of things dry in the summertime because we moved up into the upper country onto the forests and didn't leave those resources behind. Well, obviously today we've come a long ways on that, and we now leave those systems charged. We've gone through and we've adapted them to all of them having 2-inch cam lock setups on them. We've built a connector that goes from cam lock to fire threads, and all the BLM engines carry that connector. All of our engines carry that connector, and so we've improved our resource availability from that standpoint. We've also, along with our sister RFPA being Sailor Creek, gone together and got a grant to have our own repeater and our own repeater channel, so that we aren't tying up the dispatch channel when we're arriving on scene and trying to make our preparations as we get there and calling out assets. The BLM even uses our repeater now in many of those instances, just because it's actually works better in certain areas than others. But that's been a maturation process in this thing too, is communication, and that has always been our concern from the very beginning, is that with myself and with Chris Anthony, our FOS at the BLM, is getting people to communicate and use the radios. Well, that repeater, where they weren't afraid to get on our own channel and whatnot, brought that a long ways to the point that's no longer a concern. People get on the radio, they're very professional, they handle it properly, and so we've come a long ways that way as well. But this is our Three Creek RFPA, and this kind of goes back to a little story of back when Cotton Rosser had the Flying U rodeo company, and we were providing the rough stock for the mutton busting. We became the Limping U, EWE, rodeo company, and then from there we went to a little truck that we had to help neighbors move some stuff around. We became Limping U Transportation, and our motto was part loads are no problem, we show up half loaded. But obviously, so when we got in the firefighting game, it had to be Limping U Fire Crew, and we're kind of known for that out there. Also in the firefighting game, we talk about colors, and in our area, the BLM wears maroon T-shirts. Other areas they wear brown, depending on the greens, blues. When you're a member of the Three Creek RFPA and you have an old hippie for a chairman and a chief, you wear tie-dye, obviously. And then further than that, I'll get there. When you have an old Basco hippie for your chairman and chief, the assets tend to carry the color schematics of the Bass flag, the white, red, and green. So you saw what our assets were early in that old truck that was on that one picture, but this is some of the assets we have today. This has been some of the maturation process as well, is working with Rick and working with other state agencies and even some federal agencies on grants, since we are all volunteer, to improve the equipment that we respond with. We have now Type 4 engines, Type 6s. We have military trailers with slip-in units, as you can see, tenders. We have a lot of dozers and discs that we bring to the fire, and graders, those type assets too. So that part has matured as well. And then ultimately, just the relationship. And I've made the statement many, many times in the groups I've spoken to, and I just did this presentation last week in California for the University of California and the California Cattlemen's Association because of the big fires they've had down there and their wonderment whether RFPA can work for them as well. But in that opportunity, we've had a tremendous opportunity to reach out and try and reach other groups, but we've also matured to the point where I've had opportunities like in the last 2 years. Last year I sat on a 4-person hiring panel to hire the FMO in our district. This past month I sat on another 3-person hiring panel to hire the FMO. And that was an honor, but it was also an opportunity to work in partnership. And that's what I started to say there, is that one of the comments I make at all of these is there's 3 components to this deal. Number 1, it's about the partnership. Number 2, it's about the partnership. And number 3, it's ultimately about the partnership.
And I'll go off what Mike's saying is, like Mike and Rick both said, is it wasn't always great, and it took a lot of work in communicating, training, to build those relationships. And now over the past 10 years, seeing that evolve and everyone working together, and it's just a huge change to where, you'd see the RPAs on one side of the fire and BLM on one side not talking, and now we're all talking on the phones and radios before we get there. We're all meeting over the hood of the pickup. So deciding where we're going to go, helping the RFPAs when we bring in overhead teams, getting them involved with them too, so that they know that their land's going to be looked after too. It's just made a big circle, and it's good to see that we're all working together for the same common goal, and to take care of these fires on private and on BLM lands.
Yeah, I just want to add a couple things to that to emphasize how the cooperation has grown over the years. We keep throwing Mike under the bus here, but in addition to what he mentioned earlier, he forgot to tell you that he was a member of our FLA team that reviewed a burnover situation on a fire south of the bombing range. Nobody was injured, lost equipment, but it was the BLM state office that said, let's get somebody from the RFPA on this group too. So we reached out to Mike, and he was a very valuable member to that. That was an IDL, BLM, and RFPA collaboration there. I had another one too, and it slipped my mind, sorry. But it like I said earlier, the difference between, I would say, 2012 and 2022 is night and day. I can remember being on a fire and being told by the IC, federal agency, get those people off the line or I'm going to call the sheriff. And that same gentleman I've seen on BLM films singing the praises of the RFPAs and how the collaboration is working well for that district. It's not just Twin Falls, it's Boise District, it's Idaho Falls District in Idaho that deal with the RFPAs. And the way we do it in Idaho is a little bit different than Oregon. I believe in Oregon, ODF does most of the training for the RFPAs there. They do have over 20 RFPAs in the state, and Marvin has a staff over there. I'm pretty much by myself here in Idaho for the state, but I like the way we do it here. The BLM districts and where there's Forest Service involvement too, that happens. It's going to be happening with the Payette in the future, and it's been happening with the Caribou Targhee and the Sawtooth, where they have helped with RFPA training. Where I'm going with that is the federal agencies, the ones that are going to be mostly involved with the RFPAs when there's fire on the ground. They're the ones doing the training. They're going to get to meet each other. The students and the instructors are going to have faces to recognize when they show up on the fire. So it helps that relationship right off the bat. I think that's one of the strong points of our program in this state. And on our side, we tend to be more on the financial side of helping out the RFPs get started up. So typically I'll purchase their initial PPE and that type of thing with our state funds. And then we also have, I think it was a lack of timing with the sage-grouse situation and the Governor's Office of Species Conservation being involved with the Sage-Grouse Action Committee, which filtered down to the Sage-Grouse Actions Team, which is the state, federal agencies and some nonprofits getting together and providing funds. They've kind of moved on to larger landscape programs, but initially when the RFPs were starting, they were able to provide a lot of funding. A lot of the equipment you saw there in Mike's slide there was probably provided through the Sage-Grouse Actions Team, mainly Governor's Office of Species Conservation and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service with IDL and there's one other agency out there, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting who they are, but it's a great resource for the RFPAs. So.
That's wonderful. And to add to that, one of the things that I've seen as a firefighter, a county firefighter, is that the RFPAs are more embraced by our local fire departments that oftentimes are involved in initial attack of the wildlands. I have two very positive experiences with the RFPAs during the peak times of wildfire in our state. BLM or other resources are just not available. They're all taxed to other incidents. And the RFPAs have engaged and have been a great resource to the local cooperators, and for that we are very appreciative. Brett, I wonder if you could go over some of the challenges in integrating the RFPAs with the Federal Emergency Management and their teams and other external wildfire teams.
Yeah, at the start, it was pretty tough getting the teams to have those relationships like we had locally at the district levels. when an incident management team would come in, they didn't want to involve the RFPAs, and it took a lot of coordination with the districts. And my position when I was still in Oregon, you know, I'd go there, and before the team would be in place, I'd sit down with them and talk to them about RFPAs, and during the in-brief, let them know, hey, these guys are going to be out there. And it was a tough sell for a long time, but now, you know, within like Region 6, they're in Oregon and Washington. Now they know they're there in the RFPAs, and they work with them, and they'll sit over the hood of the pickup with them and go over the plans on what's going on. Where we run into issues is when we get teams coming from California, from Georgia, Atlanta, you know, wherever these teams come from that aren't local, and then really trying to get them, you know, to resell that to a different team that's never worked with an RFPA before. So that's it's a challenge. And a couple of years ago, before I left and went to Wyoming, you know, I had to deal with that pretty. It was pretty harsh. You know, I was getting a lot of phone calls. You know, they were wanting me down there really quick to try to get them incorporated, but you know, things weren't matching up for me to get down there. So, but by the time everything was all said and done, and I got them working with the RPAs, the team that came from a different region, they had phone numbers. They were talking over the hood of the pickup. They were briefing every morning. It's just getting them to understand that, you know, the RPAs are there to help put out the fires. They're there to, you know, they have that working knowledge of the area better than a lot of the agency folks. I mean, these guys grew up on the land. They know all the roads. They know all the Jeep trails. They can be a benefit not only to the local organizations, but to overhead teams that come in, which I'm sure Mike's had to deal with a lot here in Idaho, is helping those guys, you know, knowing the local weather patterns. I mean, there's stuff that they can really benefit incident management teams, and it's just the education for those teams before they come into place that's going to make both sides succeed.
I just had a thought on that. It seems like that's a lot of times the catalyst for at least for the newer RFPAs to get formed. It's the headbutting that happens when the team comes in and the locals aren't being included. And I know Mike has mentioned this before too. Once he and his members started working with the BLM, started taking NWCG training and understanding where we're coming from as state and federal firefighters, it made sense to them what the actions that were being taken were. And I think once the teams, especially outside of the Great Basin, and the Great Basin teams are probably pretty good about this now, but once they understand that these RFPAs are trained just like their FFT2s on the Type 2 hand crew, and maybe even more so, and the local knowledge that they bring to the table, I think it really helps that relationship too there, and maybe Mike can speak to it. And that was the one thought I had earlier that I thought, because Mike did help out with a situation a couple of years ago on the Badger Fire, where there was a little ruffled feather situation with an RFPA, and it was actually the Type 3 team, and Mike was able to set things up well with the Type 2 that was coming in, so.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. In that instance, I was fortunate enough that I had worked with that team lead on another fire when he'd been actually in a different position. He'd been with NDF and was kind of excluded from the team that came in to take over the fire from him. And so he'd actually had part of that same frustration that some of the rest of us had. And so Sam and I had become close friends, and it worked out well that I had that relationship, because again, it comes down to relationships. But just what Brent's talking about in those instances, what's key and what's critical is the support from the BLM resources towards the RFPA at the time that team's coming in. During that 12-year window from 2000 to 2012, we had 4 Type 1 or Type 2 teams on our operation. Our winter permit, where that's key to our cattle operation, we were burned out of it 7 out of 12 years. It brought our operation to its knees, and so we needed to be involved in those kind of situations. We were able to eventually get involved with most of those teams because something we'd say would actually come to happen, and then all of a sudden they really wanted us at the briefings and those kind of things. But it's better when it starts right from the beginning, and when we can be part of that process in the beginning, because we can speed up a lot of those things. Routing, water, a lot of the assets that we can bring to the plate too. And so, again, I go back to the fact that it's imperative that we have the support from the lead in the BLM and forest in those instances, limited instances where we are starting to work with the forest. But, because there's a lot of difference between RFPAs. One of the questions I had in California last week was, are all RFPAs the same? And the answer to that is absolutely not. You know, if you take my buddy Ox up here in North Canyon, Robert Oxrango that runs that one, he says all the time, if you want to be involved in just the management of the fire, the logistics of the fire and whatnot, you come work with me. He says, if you want to fight fire, you go down to where Darcy and Mike are down there, and then you can fight fire down there, because that's the difference. And there's a lot of others. You know, a lot of the others operate different. Shoshone Basin operates as a wildland division for their local RFD. There's just a lot of different ways that we function, but we train, as Rick alluded to, with the BLM resources, and we work together all the time. And so they know us, they know what we can bring to the party, we know what our limitations are. So again, I go to the bottom line, it's support of the lead to get us in there.
One of the things that was mentioned that I think is really key is who better to ask what the lay of the land is. And the RFPAs are extremely familiar with these areas, because there's only so much that you can tell from satellite imagery or helicopter flyovers. These are literally boots on the ground, and they can tell you the little ins and outs of these areas that may be undergoing an incident. So for Rick, what are the roles of the states in relationship between BLM and the RFPAs?
So for the BLM and the Forest Service to go into agreements with the RFPAs, and I'm not going to go into the Stafford Act and all that stuff, but in the master agreement between the state and the federal agencies, but there's the processes that need to be followed, and all non-federal firefighting entities within the state are under I'm going to use the word jurisdiction, I don't know if that's the right word, but under the auspices of the state. And so before BLM or Forest Service can go into agreement with an RFPA, the RFPA has to have an agreement with the state. So we have the Rangeland Fire Protection Agreement that each RFPA will sign, and Craig, as state forester, signs it, approving them as an RFPA. And they have to go through a number of steps to get to that status that we require. And this all tears off Idaho Code Section 38104B. I'm a fire investigator too, so I have to know the code. But that's the associations, the Timber Protective Associations and the Rangeland Fire Protection Associations are covered under that. They're set up as a nonprofit corporation. They are not a taxing district. They are not a fire district. They are a fire protection association. And the requirements that we set for them is they have to have a board of directors, articles of incorporation, bylaws, and a responsible person registered with the Secretary of State's office, and then they have to file with the IRS for, I always miss this one.
501c3.
He's my CPA. 501c, tax exempt status. And then they have to get liability insurance. And we recommend they get letters of recommendation from the county commissioners with the counties that are involved with their association, and talk to the local fire districts and make sure they know what's happening and how they're not really competing with the fire departments. And we're getting better at that. There's still some issues, but most fire departments have, I think, realized once they have an RFPA in the backyard that it's a good deal. But to get back to the question, those are the steps they need to go through, and then we sign the agreement with them, and then they can start talking to the BLM and the Forest Service.
Would any of the other panelists like to weigh in?
We kind of have the same process in Oregon. We went into an MOU with there's 24 RFPAs in Oregon scattered around Vail, Burns, Lakeview, and Prineville. And so we went into a MOU with them, which they were sanctioned by ODF, which is kind of like the Idaho Department of Lands. So, yeah, I just went into an MOU, and, you know, and some of them, as we progressed and moving forward with them, then we went into a cooperative agreement with a handful of them, of the RFPAs, just so that they were eligible for the Rural Fire Readiness Program and the Local Cooperators Assistance Program, where we could get them equipment, radios, clothing, anything that's access to the government. If they were in that agreement, we could transfer our rolling stock to them if there was some available, which, you know, you think about it, a $90,000 piece of equipment getting transferred to them to help us out on the line and help them on their private lands. It's a pretty good deal to go into an agreement with the local folks to get them that equipment and help each other out.
Yeah, that has been key in order to help fund these associations, because we are, again, we're nonprofit, we're non-taxing districts. We volunteer, we charge dues of our members, but we also work on a lot of grants. One of the entities, I think the one Rick maybe was looking for, was Bureau of Homeland Security, who helped provide some of the early grants for our radios. And you know, all these things have been beneficial because of these agreements we've been able to put together and be able to be recognizable to be awarded these type grants. You know, from our end, a lot of it was the paperwork was, you know, the startup type paperwork, again, like Rick alluded to, you know, the 501c3 filing, which is always kind of an interesting process. And yeah, my background is as a CPA, as well as a rancher, as well as, you know, the Rangeland Fire, and I don't know, a few other things. One day when I grow up, I'll decide what I want to be. But we have helped a lot of those other RFPAs get started because it is kind of a template process for the articles of incorporation, the setting up your status and those kind of things. And so, like in our instance with Sailor Creek, it wasn't accidental that there was 3 Creek and Sailor Creek. You only had to change one word on the word processor in order to fill out the same forms. And so, you know, we have done a lot that way to try to help expedite the process as well.
And Camas Creek and Henry's Creek.
Yes.
Well, Mike, tell us some of the ways firefighting tactics for the RFPAs differ from the professional firefighters.
Okay. They differ and they don't, you know, and I think that's the way I want to look at it to answer this question and whatnot. We are set up to be initial attack. We can stay for extended attack if they need specific assets, if they need me to be a liaison with RFPAs or RFDs. I've even served as a division lead, as a strike force lead, many different roles over the past 9 years that we've been working on this. And again, it goes back to trust. We now today have a trust with our BLM firefighters. We've worked together so long. We're close friends. Early in the season fires, everybody's catching up. You know, it's great to see this out there, this relationship that's come to be. But oftentimes we show up on the fire first. And I'll take the fire, I'll IC the fire. The incoming BLM IC will be in communication with me on the radio. But we build up enough trust, I can call in whatever assets I need at that point, whether they're, you know, aviation assets, whether the number of engines, tenders, those kind of things. And we have that trust that I'm not going to overstate what the need is or understate, hopefully. Any of us can do that, unfortunately, on a fire. But we've developed that to the point that then we can go ahead and we make the initial attack and we work the suppression on the fire. Chris Anthony, our FAS again, and I have worked together for so long now that we almost have a definite plan of how we're going to overall attack the fire once he gets on scene as well. We'll brief, I'll transfer command to him. I'll oftentimes move into, again, at that point, a liaison role with my own people, and or if he needs me to handle the contract crews or whatever like that. But what we do is then we team up our assets. Once their assets get on scene, we put them together and we team up our assets until we get to a point where we have pretty strong control of that fire. And in some instances, we'll even work after they bed their guys down at night with our dozers that we bring on the fire to continue to try to get the line around for a few more hours so that when their crews come back up on, we've got a line around the fire and that situation as well. But what we've also come to is that once that control is somewhat in place, then our resources start working back towards the heel of the fire, looking for heat. Because we've had too many of those fires that a second or third day down the road with a wind event blew back up because we didn't have control of those, what we considered less dangerous portions of the fire. Now we work back to the heel of fire trying to clean up that heat with our resources. And at that point, in many instances, most of our resources are discharged. Because again, we have ranchers, we have farmers, we have dairymen, we have wildlife people, the hunters, we have lots of different people in our RFPAs from lots of different interests, but they also have jobs. And so they need to get back and get to that. And some of us will stay on, if, again, as I say, if we need to be there for extended attack, if we need to maintain a water tender, maybe we need to keep a dozer or two on the fire, something like that. And I will stay until the last of our resources come off. But again, it goes back to the trust situation. We've had situations where we've actually got state office approval to cut line into wilderness areas. We've dropped retardant into wilderness areas with approval, but it's because they know we're not going to push it beyond what we should do when we're out there as this team. And we've built that trust with the state office as well. So in those instances, they know that that's something we need to do or it's going to blow on into the town of Jarvage. So those kind of things like that. There's things we have to do at that point, and they trust us enough to go ahead and allow us to make those calls.
Yeah, I think Mike hit that perfect. It's the trust and it's the training together. I don't think there's anything different that we do that the RFPAs do. I mean, we train together, work together, we're fighting fire together. So it's all, like we've all said, it's all for the common deal, is to get the fire put out so that the RFPAs can get back to hay-in or moving their animals around, whatever they need to do. It's working together, put the fire out, take care of it. And there's a lot of instances where the RFPAs go take care of a fire altogether and the BLM doesn't even show up, or the Forest Service. They take care of it. I see it, call the fire out, do the whole thing that the BLM does. So to say that they do anything different than we do, I think it would be the wrong statement. So they go and do the exact same thing, call it into dispatch, call the fires out, command the crews to get, I mean, as just one. I mean, you shouldn't tell the difference, and it's good to see that we've came this far over the past 10 years.
Okay, very good. What are some of the barriers in forming and maintaining an RFPA? And this is a question probably best directed to both Mike and Rick.
I'll start. I think the biggest barrier is finding that person or that core group that will carry the water. It's a huge hill they have to climb. It's a heavy load to take up that hill to get from, we think we need an RFPA, to getting that letter from the IRS. And it's a lot. Most of the RFPAs were formed before I was in the position, but I did get to work with Henry's Creek quite a bit, and then Weezer River, our newest RFPA, up by Cambridge, and I really feel sorry for those guys having to do the work they have to do. But fortunately, they have people like Mike Guerry that I can say, here's Mike's number, why don't you give him a call? And the existing RFPAs are really good at helping out the folks that are forming. But again, it's finding that person and that group of people that will be on the board, will be the chair, and will beat the bushes for members and whatever else they need to get done. I think that, in my mind, that's got to be the biggest hurdle. And I'll let Mike elaborate on that.
Well, and I agree that, that's what I had too, was, a lot of the challenges to startup are, of course, the upfront paperwork, the tax status, the volunteers, putting them in place and getting the training done. Again, it comes back, you got to have leadership, you got to have a professional response when you go, if you want to create that trust that we talk about. And then some of the other things that we ran into a little bit were territorial and grant issues with some of the RFDs in some instances, thinking that maybe there was going to be competition for grants that we were going to create, or that we might be trying to take over their district or something like that. And that wasn't the case. And they soon found that we bring a different set of assets to the fire. Like in our instances, we're bringing dozers and tractor discs and those kind of things that they're not bringing as an RFD, obviously. So those were some of the challenges that we dealt with early on. Most of those kind of went to the wayside because, yes, again, like I talked about earlier on the paperwork side of it, we've got that down to a template process today, and we just got to get the right people in the place at the right time, and that's what it always comes down to. As far as maintaining, that's the tough one. That's the tough one. Because obviously, again, it comes down to leadership. It comes down to making sure you're creating a safe situation for your firefighters. So safety has to be a huge part of it, and you have to continue to hammer and hammer and hammer on safety. And you're still going to have issues, and you've got to be able to deal with those when those safety issues come up. Another one is complacency. With success sometimes comes complacency. And as I said to you, we had 12 4 Type 1 or Type 2 teams on our resource district over a 12-year window. Chris and my unstated desire is to not have another one on there. And so 9 years later, knock on wood, we have not had a Type 1 or Type 2 team in our resource area. And we hope to be able to continue that. But again, as I say, with that, without those big fires, the complacency starts to come back. We start to talk about, that's probably not likely to happen again. And, it's a different thing. We're no longer a sage steppe resource area, sagebrush steppe. We're more of a grassland. It's not going to be as tough. But it is. It's just changed. The fires are still difficult. And so then the other key is continuing to keep the interest of your volunteer firefighters. And a lot of that's brought on by specific skills training, those kind of things that we try to do. We're much different today with our refreshers that we do and our AARs that we do with the BLM after a fire or at the end of the season, those kind of the annual refresher trainings. We're very much more specific to fire issues that we've dealt with while we're out there. As a matter of fact, we have our refresher on Monday, this coming Monday, and one of the things we're going to be dealing with is an incident I had to deal with in the instance of a RFD. With our RFD, because they're not comfortable working with dispatch, they oftentimes ask me to go ahead and IC even if it's on their district, and that's what it was in this instance. And we had an individual, and he's a dear friend of mine, but he's also known to be kind of a wild card and doesn't like to play by the rules, we were entering through a fence to get in through the black, around to the outside edge of the fire. He took off without communication with his engine, a low-slung engine, was going to go through a draw that he probably would have hung up in that was full of tumbleweeds, much like the one that had the dozer situation, and was going to be approaching the fire to the head of the fire with unburned fuel between him and the fire and no escape route. And so I'm touching on a lot of the watch out orders and those kind of things. And I had to call him down. I had to run him down, call him down, and there was a very heated exchange. And but I wouldn't allow it. He's a great individual, a former Marine. Well, not a former Marine. You're never a former Marine. You're always Marine. But You know, and he's been known to make the statement that there is no greater honor in life than to perish in the defense of your country. And I agree with him and I appreciate him for that. I just don't want it on my fire. I'm not going to visit him in the burn center. I'm not going to attend his funeral. It's not going to happen. And those are challenges too, to have to deal with those kind of things, but they come with the situation. Brent, I know, Rick, I know, has been in those situations. They're not fun situations to come with the territory.
I have a follow-up question. You had mentioned continuing to motivate your folks on the RFPA. Are you experiencing some of the same challenges that the fire service as a whole has been experiencing with recruitment and retention?
It varies between RFPAs. Some RFPAs are struggling with that greatly. We've been fortunate enough in ours that we've been able to maintain about 55 members fairly consistently through that. Now, we don't have 55 members show up to every fire, and thankfully we don't, because it would be a management nightmare. But yes and no. It's dependent on the area. It's kind of dependent again on how many fires you've had recently that kind of spurred the interest. And it also, again, like I said, it comes back to trying to keep the interest of the people that you have there. So again, in our trainings, we've tried to be more specific to the issues. We tried for a few years to try to do mock drills, mock fires, those kind of things. That became difficult because in the spring of the year, you guys were trying to get your people on board, had a lot of things going. We're calving, maybe we're branding, whatever, hard to get everybody gathered up. But what we found now is what we use is our early season fires. And we use them as training drills because they're easier fires to catch. It's before the fuels are so dry and those kind of things. And so we've now gone that route and to do training that way. We've also in our RFPA, specific to our RFPA, we have teams now. And we have teams for our specific assets. And if you're not trained in that asset, you will not respond to the fire in that asset. So we've tried to increase our skills that way in working with some of the BLM crew chiefs, the engine bosses, the dozer bosses, some of those things to do more specific trainings. And I think that's helped us do that, keep that retention.
Okay, very good, thank you. I'm going to have one last question so we provide enough time for questions from our audience. How can we strengthen the collaborative relationship between the BLM and the RFPAs? And I think, Brent, this would be a great opportunity.
Well, like we've been talking, it's already strong. It's just keep getting the word out there, with the local landowners, with the BLM, other agencies, continually working together. All we can do is make it better, keeping it getting stronger. I think it's probably where we want it. I think it'd be a hard time to try to make anything different when we already have it working so well. It's just getting the word out there and maybe developing more in some of our weak spots where we don't have some RFPAs, and try to talk them into, filling some of the gaps where we don't have the coverage, because, without that extra coverage to help, if we just talked about recruitment and retention, we're having a hard time filling the seats for our trucks to get out there and fight these fires. And, that's going to really make us rely on the RFPAs and RFDs a lot more to help us out and take care of these fires. So if that's something where we can see an empty spot, and Mike knows that, or I know that, or Rick, or other agencies know that, maybe they go and communicate with that local area there and try to get another RFPA set up, because it's going to really benefit all circles. So that would be what I would say. I'm not sure what Mike and Rick think on that.
Yeah, we saw that question in advance, and that's probably the one I played around with most of my mind. Because the reality has already answered the question. The relationship between the RFPAs and the BLM is great, and even I think Shoshone Basin has a decent relationship with Sawtooth National Forest, and I'm hopeful that Weiser River and the Payette Forest, they do have, I think, an advantage with one of the AFMOs is the brother of the chairman. So, these family things help a lot sometimes, but it's, again, I go back to, I don't know how well it works in Oregon. I see it more from the ODF side with dealing with Marvin over there. But here, again, the strength is the fact that the districts that work with the specific RFPA, doing the training really helps bond that relationship, so.
And that's what I saw in Oregon. I mean, we were doing a lot of the trainings, and one last thing I want to add is from the BLM side, the Forest Service, when I was in Oregon, noticed the relationships and how well we worked with the RFPAs. Before I left, down in the Lakeview District, the Fremont Wainema, they went into an agreement with RFPA so that the RFPAs could go out onto the Forest Service lands and help them fight fires there. So that was a great step. And for the Forest Service to see the benefit of having, because, a lot of the ranchers and stuff, they don't only have cattle on BLM lands, they run on the Forest Service lands and all that too. So they know those lands as well as the BLM. So it took like a little over a year for us to get that in place. But once, they saw the benefit and it finally started getting some traction, we did get an agreement in place before I left. And now the RFPAs are up there in the forest in the Fremont Wainema country, helping out fight fire there.
Well, as a insider or an outsider looking in, from what it was prior to the 10 years, everybody had an opinion on how a fire should have been fought, the efforts that were presented, and now as that outsider looking in, it's a much better relationship, and I am not hearing that criticism of our federal partners as it was in the past.
I just want to make one comment on that too, because I agree with that so much. I agree with what these two gentlemen just said about, it's the continued support from our partners that's going to continue to maintain this process with the RFPAs. That's imperative. But we've also had the opportunity, and that's part of what this slide presentation, this PowerPoint presentation I have is that we've had the opportunity to go out to service groups in our area and talk about the partnership and the successes of the partnership. And that's also helped to influence that you were just talking about, from those that aren't really specifically involved or informed, but aren't unwilling to give their opinion. So it's oftentimes beneficial to be able to go out and do that kind of thing.
Okay, we'll take this opportunity to take any questions from our audience or from those folks that are visiting virtually.
Yeah, thanks guys. Great discussion so far. Heard a little bit about Mike's introduction to prescribed fire at an early age. Mark Boyle from the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality is asking about RFPA's involvement in prescribed fire, if there's been discussion or practice around that.
Well, in our instance, it's been a shift because we were entirely a sagebrush steppe ecosystem in the Jarbidge and on the Humboldt-Tyabe. As a matter of fact, when we cross the line onto the forest, people have a hard time identifying why it's the forest because we have no trees. But we just have a little taller sagebrush. But in these major fires, we, in that 12-year window, we burned 1.4 million acres on a 1.3 million acre resource area. Now, we didn't burn all the acres in the resource area because we burnt part of it repetitively, but we did burn the equivalent of the resource area in that window. So our ecosystem changed to a grassland fire ecosystem. The difference largely being, the heat issue that we dealt with when we were dealing with the sagebrush fires was a key component of trying to handle those fires. But today, the speed of change, I think, is what we deal with these grassland fires. We have so many cells that come through, and we'll have 3 different outflow winds in a 45-minute window on a cell that might be anywhere from 50 to 70 miles an hour that can just blow a grass fire up in many directions just immediately. And the dangers associated with that, we always talk about having one foot in the black and, fighting from the black and those things to try to be safe and escape safety zones and escape routes. And we work very hard because there isn't 1 acre of land out there, as I say, that's worth life or limb. I'm not going to anyone's spouse and telling them we didn't bring them home. I'm not doing that. That's not in my DNA. We're going to do it the safe way, or we're not going to do it at all. And that's Chris's opinion, and that goes across the effort. But yes, it has changed the animal that's out there that we fight. From a situational awareness standpoint, you've got to be making decisions all the time.
And to add on to the prescribed fire part of it, when I was in Oregon, the Blue Mountain RFPA down in the Jordan Valley country did go into an agreement with the BLM, and we did do a prescribed burn with them. It wasn't a huge landscape burn or anything. It isn't like 1 acre or 2 acres, just doing some burning along the roadside and tumbleweeds on fences and stuff like that. It was a great achievement to be able to make that step and do a prescribed burn together, because it also works on relationship, working together on the fire, communicating, but just to be able to do a burn like that in the off season where we're dropping the matches, starting the fire instead of a fire that's already started, working together as a group. It was a really good burn to see, to where we had the management there, and then the RFPAs brought all the resources there to put the fire out once we started it. So it was a win-win for the RFPAs and for the BLM. So it's, to do more of that would be a good stroke of business.
So I think about 2006, 2005, there was a discussion at our annual fall meeting, and the Idaho BLM wasn't allowing RFPAs on prescribed burns. And I think it was a Waihi RFP that was asking to be able to do that so they could get some training. And I volunteered and said, you can come on any IDL and burn, either up on our timberlands or down in the Hawaii country. And a couple years later, Waihi is talking about prescribed burns they were doing with BLM. So I asked AFMO, and he said, things change. So, that's the progress that this program makes. Henry's Creek RFPA wanted to do some burning, I think it was last spring, along the Bone Road out of Idaho Falls. And it was tumbleweed, our friend tumbleweed. And it was a very successful burn, working with the BLM in that area too, the Idaho Falls district. So they are getting more involved in working with at least the BLM. I don't know if IDL has had any engagement with them on some of their projects in the Oahes and then up in Black Canyon country, but they are somewhat involved now.
Great, thanks, y'all. I think we went over our time a little and we're eating into our break. Does anyone in the room have a super pressing question? Because otherwise we might wrap this up. All right, then. Well, thank you all so much for joining us, sitting on the panel today. And we'll take a 5-minute break, get some water, be back at around 10:30, I believe.